A warm welcome and thank you very much for joining Sporty's latest webinar presentation, 10 Tips for CFIs to Stay Active During COVID-19. I'm your facilitator and co-host. My name is Eric Radtke and I lead the educational team at Sporty's Academy at our world headquarters just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio. Flight instructor, very pleased to be with you today. Let me first make reference to our title for today's presentation, 10 Tips for CFIs. Number one, I want to ensure that we are looking to be a little bit more all-encompassing than just CFIs, although we expect that most of our attendees today are CFIs. This is really intended to apply to anyone involved in aviation education, and this just seems like a really good time to be speaking frankly about how the events have unfolded, how it's affecting our entire industry, and what we can do to continue to stay engaged and stay active. Before we get too much further, I want to offer a special thank you to Sporty's Pilot Shop for sponsoring this ongoing series. We certainly hope that when you think about educational resources, content, instructor supplies, other aviation related supplies, you think of Sporty's and Sportys.com. So a big thank you to Sporty's for sponsoring. Certainly, even after we scheduled and created and came up with the concept for today's presentation, things are drastically different than just a couple of weeks ago, and of course drastically different than even a couple of months ago. And quite frankly, this is a topic we'd rather not be talking about. We'd rather be talking about something a lot more positive in things related to kind of active teaching. But the situation is what it is, and we're to deal with it. And there's certainly hope for better times ahead. Certainly want to emphasize that our deepest empathy to everyone involved. We're no different as an aviation training organization in terms of being deeply affected. Thoughts, condolences to any of you on that have been more profoundly impacted by COVID-19, and certainly a big shout out and thank you to anyone out there who's on the front lines, who's working to support our day-to-day lives. We very much appreciate that. You're appreciated and valued. A few housekeeping items to begin with. Number one, always a question at top of mind is, can I come back and review or reference any of the material that we will be talking about today? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We will have the recording up and posted by the end of the day today. You can view all of Sporty's webinar recordings at sportys.com/webinars in the webinar archive, and you can always check out our Sporty's YouTube channel for the latest postings and and there's a lot of great content posted there. Also, reference to the GoToWebinar software that you're using, we will have a little interactivity today, an opportunity for you to weigh in and answer a couple of polling questions. Gives everyone participating a little feedback. So look for that coming up in the next few slides. And also we will of course reserve a little time at the end of our presentation for some Q&A. So feel free of course to submit those questions via the GoToWebinar software, and we'll reference those at the end of the presentation. I want to take a moment and welcome my co-host for today, Mr. Charlie Masters. Charlie, thanks for being on with us today.
You're entirely welcome.
Charlie is a flight instructor, MEI, CFII, and career educator, and most recently serves as our Vice President of Sales and Customer Service. So in other words, Charlie spends a lot of his activity talking to prospective customers, helping build a flight school business, helping individual CFIs build their individual businesses and maintain those businesses. So Charlie has a lot of great insight into what is transpiring, and hopefully some positive thoughts of better times ahead. I certainly want to mention that a lot of what's available to us in terms of support, it's very regionalized. It depends on various states, but hopefully for all of the flight instructors who are out there who are without work, certainly want to encourage you to investigate any support resources. Unemployment is one that comes to mind. The National CARES Act certainly made a provision for not only employees but also independent contractors to take advantage of unemployment benefits. So hopefully you're checking your various state resources on a regular basis for how to go about applying for some of that assistance that may be out there. That's definitely something we'd encourage everyone to take advantage of. And also to get a little idea, and again, our first kind of interactivity option for us today, quick poll question we want to put in the field is let us know a little bit about who you are and what your current status is. We have a limit as to how many categories we can apply here, but you can feel free to select more than one answer if something doesn't necessarily meet your criteria. So we'll give just a moment for everyone to respond to that and let everyone know kind of the overall status. Okay, kind of a lot what you'd expected. So a large percentage, nearly half of you appear to be on a complete and total aviation hiatus. That's certainly not unexpected there. But a significant percentage of you indicated that while you're not providing flight instruction, you are doing some flying activity to stay current. So that's also great to hear because certainly this is one of those physical skills that can degrade over time, and it's encouraging to know that some of you have had the opportunity at least to maintain some of that proficiency. You're not alone. Hopefully that was part of the underlying messages in some of our opening remarks. Part of the motivation even creating this presentation was to again offer to some group support and let everyone know that many of us are experiencing the same things. We're subject to some of the national guidance, of course, that has been distributed, and we're also subject to various state and even down to the local government entity restrictions. Those can vary a great deal. You know, I know for a lot of us, and maybe some of you on the presentation today, we're looking for potentially some kind of simple answer or simple interpretation. Here is what I should do, or here is when I can do these type of things. And it's just really not out there and probably not possible. Complex, challenging situations, just like we're experiencing, they typically don't have any simple solutions. And I would say this is definitely one of those. So don't expect there to be some national message with respect to pilot training. It's going to be very regionalized. It's going to be just like we're seeing across the country in terms of individual states that make their own evaluations and then decide to open various businesses. Now, we can kind of take some comfort in the fact that as aviation educators, as professionals, you know, we're accustomed to working within a safety system for mitigating risk, for evaluating data. So, you know, you can kind of think of this like you would approach any flight, that each flight is going to be a little bit different, and each individual flight instructor situation or flight school is going to be a little different. So you're going to have to, yes, evaluate and listen to what's being distributed or messaged from a federal standpoint down to state and even then the local municipalities. And then you're also going to, and don't discount this, how you're feeling personally. And again, everyone's personal situation is a little bit different. Some of you may cohabitate with populations that are of higher risk, and your return to the flight deck and working with students face to face, that may be a ways off from someone that's in a lower risk category potentially and doesn't have the risk of exposing someone else potentially. And then you have to take into account what just the local feel and the local sentiment is. You know, are you in a hotbed of activity? You know, how is the community reacting? Is there a sense that the community is ready to kind of get back to, I don't want to say normal, because I think that's still a long way off, but at least returning to some form of normal activity. So, gathering a sense of the community that you are in is a very important part of this, other than just listening to whatever the national messages may be, or even some of the messages that are being distributed by our various associations. Some good news, some really good news in this, and Charlie can elaborate even a little further, but we are sensing, kind of that some of the inside information or the inside baseball we can talk about from a Sporty's perspective. We know, we have the data, we have the science behind it, that there is just a tremendous amount of activity, um, with students, pilots participating in various virtual learning activity, whether that's consuming webinars, whether that's participating in online pilot training activity. There are a lot of pilots out there that are staying engaged, that are staying involved, that are earning endorsements to take written examinations. It's out there. There are people that want to get back in the airplane and get back to the flight deck. It's not going to be everyone, but the demand is certainly building. So if you're feeling nervous, and again, this of course can fluctuate region to region, about whether the customers will be there, everything that we're seeing would give the indications that absolutely the pilot training customers will be back. Certainly, you've probably seen that from a national perspective. The federal government is talking about a phased-in approach over kind of a 3-phase period, and many of the states will adopt something similar, where they're looking for a period of time, specifically 14 days, to see positive trends in infections, illness, hospital activity. Positive trends in general over that 14-day period can open up states to deploying some of these phased-in approaches. So do pay attention to the information and guidance that's being distributed in your individual states, and start thinking. It's definitely not too early to start thinking, what will that return look like specifically for your activity? What will be the new normal, so to speak? And to help you get started thinking about what some of that looks like. And we've taken some time to do some of our own research across the country, and in speaking to various organizations, associations, involving pilot training. We know that in terms of best practices, there are going to have to be new cleaning sanitation procedures inevitably that could be in place forever. But paying attention to surfaces that are touched and commonly used, and making sure those are clean between activities, to being more cautious about sharing headsets, things like that. Even cleaning aircraft exteriors. That's all part of this, making sure common areas that students are coming in and out of, making sure that those are clean and sanitized on an ongoing basis. And, I would expect, certainly just an opinion, but I would expect, as we start to see these phased in openings, there could potentially be another run on many of these supplies. So, you could be thinking now, what supplies might I want to start procuring just individually, whether that be wipes, sanitizer, whatever the case may be. There could be some new supplies that you're going to maintain in your flight bag, in your instructor bag, really from here on out. It certainly appears that this concept of social distancing, at least 6 feet, that's here to stay for some time. When we're talking about in-airplane instruction, in your 172, in your Cherokee, that's of course not possible. So if you can't maintain that 6 feet of separation, that begs the question, what can we do to further mitigate? And certainly what we're hearing from a lot of training organizations, and something that will be deployed at our own flight school, of course, is going to be the use of masks for that added protection. We know a lot of some organizations, including ourselves, have tested some reusable masks in the cockpit, and rehearsed or practiced, evaluated various communication scenarios. And while it may not be the most comfortable, and it's certainly going to take some getting used to, it's our position that it can be done safely. So the use of masks is something you might want to be begin considering whether that be policy or whether that be recommended, or that's something you just want to do for yourself. And if you decide ultimately that that is the direction you're going to go, thinking about how you're going to obtain, how you're going to procure, how you're going to disseminate that information to your various clients, that this will be kind of an expectation moving forward if you're not going to be able to maintain the recommended distance. Proficiency. We know from the poll that many of you are continuing to get some proficiency in. That's wonderful. Many of your clients will not have had that opportunity. So you're going to have to be very cautious. If you are one that has not been able to maintain some currency, hopefully you'll have an option. If you're working with a flight school, hopefully they'll provide the option for you to go out and knock a little of that rust off, so to speak. But do just understand your students aren't going to return in the same spot they were from a proficiency standpoint as when they went on hiatus. Likely many of your clients and yourself have been kind of on the shelf for a month or so, and things can get pretty rusty. So allow for some patience, maybe increase your kind of safety margins as everyone gets back into the flow of things. Kind of continuing getting back to our topics of 10 tips for staying active. Here's a few of the main categories we're going to hit today. We're going to give you just a quick regulatory update, although I wish there was a little more there for us to talk about. Strategies, of course, to stay connected, some resources to help you and your business, some ideas, some new activities maybe you can participate in right now to continue to help yourself grow and develop professionally, and what the future, of course, looks like. Our quick regulatory update. So the only thing definitively from a regulatory standpoint that has been announced and disseminated as policy is that the FAA has announced that there will be no enforcement of expired medical certifications if the medical expired between March 31st and June 30th. So this was in response to many AME offices across the country, of course, being closed, and part of that ongoing effort to not overwhelm or add any additional burden to the overall healthcare system. Now, a point that's been debated hotly across the industry, and you may be heard of, that this policy indicates that the medical doesn't get extended. It essentially says if you have an expired medical, it won't be enforced by the FAA. So that doesn't necessarily mesh if you have an insurance policy that requires a current medical certificate. So that's just one other consideration when it comes to that regulatory relief that was issued. Now, while that's the only thing to talk about definitively, we've been given every indication by FAA, and our various associations have told us that the FAA is working on a comprehensive special regulation that will give additional leniency or relief from all these various activities and all these currency requirements: flight review, IPC, landings, knowledge test results, completing practical examinations. So if you or your customers fall into any of these categories, this should be coming soon. And we've been given indications that this will be retroactive. So again, there is some light at the end of the tunnel if you are panicking or if any of your customers are panicking. Also, back to that policy update, I want to draw your attention in the GoToWebinar platform. We do have a handout section, and I have uploaded the actual FAA policy. You may have better things to do than read the FAA policy document, but if you want to dive into that a little bit further, you can go to the handout section and see that actual document. Also, just recently, the FAA did also make mention that two of the most kind of popular right now, experimental, if you will, medications to treat COVID. The FAA has issued a policy statement to say that that's essentially grounding for a 48-hour period if you are going to use either of those popular medications. And additionally, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but it just so happens kind of a timely topic. Do remember, we are getting into kind of allergy season. We're experiencing that, a lot in the Midwest. And anytime you or your clients are using any medication, over the counter, prescription, whatever the case may be, you should definitely be giving added attention to how that might affect your medical and your ability to safely operate equipment, operate an aircraft. And the general guidelines from the FAA is that no matter what you're taking, if it does compromise your faculties in any way, that the correct length of time to wait before you operate an airplane would be 5 times the dosing interval. So if it's a medication that says take every 6 hours, 4 times daily, that'd be 6 times 5, 30 hours of not taking the medication before you would engage in any pilot training activity. And also a reminder, and this is something the FAA has reminded us of several times recently, with medical marijuana being deployed or accepted in more and more states, and even recreational marijuana use, this is still contrary to federal law and still a disqualifying issue, probably goes without saying when it comes to your FAA medical. I will also make mention that the NTSB recently released a report whereby they analyzed 1,000 aviation accidents in the U.S. Between 2013 and 2017. And they did, somewhat alarming, find that 59% of fatally injured pilots tested positive for at least one potential impairing drug, either over-the-counter, prescription, or an illicit drug. And the single greatest offender was a sedating antihistamine, which is the active ingredient in many of the over-the-counter allergy, cold, sleep aid treatments, that type of thing. This is an issue that the NTSB has issued warnings about periodically over the years, but it appears to be a trend that's not really getting better. So again, given this audience of aviation educators, it just felt like that was something to make mention of. So this is recent news. And back to the handout section, we did go ahead and post that entire report from the NTSB in the handout section, so you could consume that at your leisure. So our tip 1, 10 tips for staying active as a CFI. Number 1, right in front of us, renew your CFI. And to help you do that, the next one is on Sporty. So right now, if you haven't seen the announcement, Sporty's is offering its online FIRC, it's eFIRC, absolutely free. You can go to sportys.com/FIRC, so you can jot that down, go to it after the presentation, and you can complete the checkout transaction process, $0 amount, and that will give you 12 months of access to the Sporty's eFIRC. So just a reminder, in order to renew your FIRC, if you haven't had the activity requirement, which is 5 students endorsed for a practical test and an 80% pass rate over the last 2-year period, your alternate kind of renewal, if you haven't earned a new instructor rating, is to accomplish a FIRC. There's a 3 calendar month buffer period by which you can do that. For example, my CFI is expiring this June, specifically June 30th, because it's on the calendar month system. So I could have completed a FIRC and renewed my CFI as early as March of this year and still hold that same expiration date of June 30th. So you have that 3 calendar month buffer. You can't go past. You have to renew it ahead of your CFI expiration, and there hasn't been any relief given to that yet. So you definitely want to err on the side of caution in getting that done. Now, the free Sporty's FIRC purchase does get you 12 months of access. So if your CFI expires anytime in the next year, it would behoove you to go ahead and take advantage of this offer, and you can transact it, know you're going to have access to it for up to 12 months, and you can start in on that 3 months ahead of your next expiration. It's cloud-based, very easy to use, it's mobile friendly, PC, Mac, iPad, Android, doesn't matter. 16 individual lessons. The FIRC curriculum is very prescriptive from the Federal Aviation Administration, so it meets all those requirements. There's a variety of Sporty supplemental training content, brings in some video-based learning, some supplemental resources, a complete FAA library. Each of these modules has individual review quizzes, which are going to be very important to you as you approach the final exam, because the final exam is what is ultimately required in order to be issued the graduation certificate and be able to renew. Something brand new we just added is our exclusive CFI endorsement guide. This meets the most recent advisory circular guidance. I've actually provided a copy of our CFI endorsement guide to you in PDF form. It's in the handout section, so feel free to grab that. Also available in the FIRC, as well as that extensive FAA library of resources. So hope you certainly take advantage of that. The CFI endorsement guide is very plain language, very CFI to CFI like, and focuses on the most common endorsements that CFIs are going to encounter. Everything from accepting a brand new student pilot certificate, all the way through commercial pilot. And I'm going to welcome my co-presenter colleague, Charlie Masters, to take over with starting with tip 2. Charlie?
Thanks, Eric. And, Eric said I was Vice President Customer Relations, and that's but some people around here call me a senior flight instructor because I think I'm the oldest person on the staff. I've been around for a while, started flying in 1975. And when I started in 75, it didn't matter which airplane you were sitting in. It probably had an ARC or a King or a Narco radio in it. And they were all pretty simple. There would be a button to turn them on, adjust the volume, another one for the squelch. A big knob would change the big numbers in the frequency, a little knob would change the little numbers. But now we know that that's not what we see. And you may know the avionics in your flight school's airplane, you may know them well. But what if you have a customer that needs a flight review and he has Aspen avionics suite? So, enrolling in the avionics course at Sporty's will cover the various kinds of avionics, and so you can be familiar with them before you get in the airplane. Another topic that people find courses very helpful is the weather. Your students, when they come to you, they're used to the weather girl on TV interpreting all those maps and charts and telling them what the weather is going to do today for the local area. As you're well aware, as pilots, we cover a bigger area where we may start off here in this greater Cincinnati area and wind up before the day is over in Palm Springs or something. So traveling across the country, with your students need to learn how to interpret those weather maps and weather products that's available for them. Other courses that are available, as far as just proficiency is concerned, navigating airspace, communications, learning, and I have several requests right now of our hangar customers out here when we can start instruction again, that they're wanting to get their IPC, get instrument current again. They may not need an IPC, but it's been some time since they've actually flown an instrument in conditions. And also they may need to prepare for a flight review, and all those kind of courses are available. The fun kind of thing that you can do to fill in the time now whenever, till we can really start flying again, is to think about earning an additional rating. That might be a multi-engine certificate. The multi-engine airplanes, as long as everything's working, they just operate like a powerful single. You'll have folks that will question and say, well, why am I paying for 2 engines when during my training I only get to use 1? Because that's what multi-engine training is mostly about, is how to handle those beasts on 1 engine. One that's is a lot of fun for an airplane is get a seaplane rating. And you may be miles away from a seaplane base, but there are courses available on seaplane transition. You'll learn about things that, how to sail a seaplane, how to beach a seaplane, how to take off and how to land. It is a lot of fun. A glider rating, flying helicopters. I have tried that. Some people says it's like juggling while you're standing on a basketball. I can tell you that it's certainly challenging. A tail wheel endorsement. If you don't have your tail wheel endorsement, you're going to have, especially these days, with some of the experimental airplanes, some of the RVs that are becoming more and more popular. Uh, they're tailwheel airplanes, and if you could get that endorsement, you'll find yourself more marketable as people need IPCs and flight reviews, things of that nature. And then you could, if you're interested in such things, I can tell you right now, I'm not. Again, I'm an old guy. I get all I have as much fun as I need to have flying an airplane right side up. But you might be interested in an aerobatics course, and Sporty's has one of those available. Again, all these courses are sportys.com/mycourses. Another thing that we can be doing in this hiatus is maybe prepare for your next written exam. You know, back in the last century when I was growing up, there was one of the popular genres of books. You go to a bookstore would be self-help, and there people like Zig Ziglar. One of a very popular one was a guy named Stephen Covey, who had a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And his seventh habit was sharpening the saw, meaning keeping yourself sharp, keeping yourself engaged in your own development. So, for example, if you're a CFI, sometimes we'll refer to them as a Cyclops. And if you're interested in getting that CFI instrument, now would be a good time to prepare for that written exam. If you're career-minded and thinking about an ATP down the road, the CTP is still required for the ATP. You know, and there's all kinds of study resources that you can be working on to get to that next written exam. Of course, Sporty's has a number of resources got a brand new commercial course. Some of you may be familiar with Shepherd Air. Of course, the GLIME, the Red Books, ASA, and JEP all have study resources to prepare you for that next written exam. Written exams are good for 24 or 60 calendar months, depending on what we're talking about. And there may be some relief forthcoming, but we can't count on that. But certainly, you know, going back to sharpening the saw, everything that you learn is going to make yourself a better instructor. So another thing that you can do that I think most of us kind of feel like we are not qualified to do, but maybe you can do some video instruction with your existing students to keep them engaged as well. And it used to be, you know, you needed a studio and a green wall and all kinds of special equipment. Now, anybody with a smartphone can conduct some video instruction, either through FaceTime, Facebook Live, Skype, WebEx, Zoom, Google, Microsoft Hangouts. There's a number of platforms that's available where you can link up either individually with a student or a group of your students and have almost a classroom setting. So what would you do? You could have flight planning scenarios, do oral quizzes, go through emergencies and abnormal situations. Those things, you know, keeping your students engaged, those emergency procedures that's supposed to be committed by memory. You know, your students are first of all, remember this about your students. They've likely been out of the airplane for 4 or 6 or maybe 8 weeks. And they're going to be a little rusty. I think Eric mentioned before about being patient with your students, and remember that, you know, they haven't amassed the skills. They don't have the life situations. They haven't been in an airplane as much as you have. So let's show some patience to them and help them along. Another type of instruction is, if you're familiar with it, is Quizlets. These are electronic or computer virtual flashcards. There's some available that's already in the aviation world. If you go to the Quizlet website, you can make some up of your own. One of the things that we're always a little we need to be aware of is that everybody can be on the internet. And before you recommend a YouTube video or a Quizlet or whatever to your students, you'll probably want to review that content yourself before you send your students off to learn something, because we all know from experience that not everybody who makes a YouTube video knows exactly what they're talking about. So we got a poll question. What is your preferred virtual instruction platform? If you've used one, check the ones that you've used and any of them that you've used. There's no ranking here, but we'll just see what's being used out there. I'll give you a
We're
moment
hoping
to do
this
that.
Yeah, Charlie, we'll give a moment for the results to come in, and we're hoping the results of this will maybe give some confidence to maybe some others on the line that they might try one of these platforms. This certainly isn't exhaustive in terms of your choices, many that we could put on here, really. It sure seems like Zoom, Charlie, is the far and away the kind of leader here, and a distant second would be FaceTime.
Okay, I've participated in some Zoom myself. Again, going back to my age, it's hard for me not to think about the Brady Bunch when I start a Zoom meeting, but seeing all those faces on there. And a thing, just a little bit while we're on that, if you haven't done it before, make out a lesson, try it on one of these platforms, try it with your wife, your girlfriend, kids, whatever you have before you're ready to go live, maybe, and just to make sure that you understand how it all works. So another thing that we can be doing during our off times here is to do some simulator or chair flying, just to keep ourselves sharp on procedures. And you can encourage your students to do this as well. If your school or if your airport has an ATD, certainly use that. Will keep you up, especially on instrument procedures. You can practice certain scenarios across countries, going to new places or challenging airspace. You know, go to Southern California, go to the New York area, practice maneuvers. Again, the sims are not as realistic as being in the airplane often, unless you're in one of those level D sims, but it's certainly the procedures, the setting up the airplane for the maneuver, basically walking through the maneuver will keep that saw sharpened for you. Another thing you can practice on is crosswind landings. Again, that's they're virtual landings. They're not like the real thing, but it'll keep the you know, what the procedures that you need to use, keep those fresh in your mind. And then another great thing that sims or chair flying or an ATD at the airport is to practice emergency situations. You know, there are things you can do in a simulator that you wouldn't dare do in an airplane, and wouldn't want to be even underneath of an airplane that's doing those things. So it's a great way to practice those emergencies. You know, the fires, of course, everybody thinks about the engine out, but you know, if you have somebody that's working with you that can, you know, kill that oil pressure on you to see if you're noticing if you're using a scan of the engine instruments, all those things are a great way to keep sharp on those skills, as long as well as practicing, you know, your your cockpit resource management, just having everything lined up and knowing one procedure, which the correct order that things should be in. Here's a great idea, Eric. We could watch this webinar, and I think our people are on board for that. And we have a number of webinars that are available. on preparing for the check ride, weather, data link weather, electronic flight books, flight planning. Um, uh, there's over 40 available at Sporty's YouTube webinar channel, and of course the EAA and the FAA also will have webinars that qualify for your wings training. So there's a number of webinars that you can catch either in person, or most of these are recorded as well. Another thing to fill in the time is to write an article, and this goes back to the video presentations. I think a lot of us don't feel qualified to be an author, or may not feel qualified to be an author because we've just not done it before. But there's places you can submit an article to that are looking for content and looking for the kind of content that you can provide as a flight instructor, or as an especially maybe a student pilot. These are at studentpilotnews.com, airfaxjournals.com, and you can submit those through learn2fly at sportys.com. And it doesn't have to be war and peace. As a matter of fact, I'd kind of warn against that. But if you have an interesting anecdote that you've been through, some lesson that you've learned, not all the lessons you've learned, but some lessons that you've learned, some reflections on your flying, uh, this is a great way for you to sit down again, think about sharpening the saw, and think through a process and put it down on paper, or put it down on a computer to make sure that it reads nice and has a flow to it. Provide some imagery with your article submission that makes it more real to your reader. And it's a very satisfying experience to see yourself published. Your students will really appreciate being able to go online and read an article you've published, and it's a resume builder for you for on down the line as well.
Now, I know there can't be any of you out there, even if you have your favorite flight planning or charting app, that has truly mastered all the intricacies. And part of that is because all these charting apps and platforms are continually adding new features. So take the time during your hiatus to master some new features. Or if you've just been involved or just been using one particular app, maybe try something else that'll give you some good background, some good experience to be able to compare and contrast some of the different platforms, not only for yourself, but this is information, of course, you can share and convey to your clients. One that's just brand new, introduced as of the end of March, is Stratus Insight. So that's a brand new one you can check out from Apario. Virtually all Flight Plan Go is a free app to begin with, but virtually all of the flight planning, charting apps, EFB apps do offer free trials of at least 30 days. So you can go download for free. You have the next 30 days, the next month, to use it as much as you would like. If you're looking for a starting point of how you go about kind of doing this compare and contrast exercise, is try to do the same activity for each and every app. So in other words, pick the same 2 airports, plan the same cross-country flight, access the same weather information. And in this world, there's room for Coke and Pepsi. So what you think and how you interact and what you find intuitive in one app, you may not find the exact same thing in the next. That's why it's always a healthy exercise to see what else may be out there. So not only plan these flights for your own benefit, but also then take, I'd recommend taking an educator approach. Okay, I'm going out to accomplish this type of training activity on this given day. How would I interact and use this data in this particular app for each one of these flights? And I think you'll be able to get a sense fairly quickly which one is going to be best suited for you, and potentially which platform is going to be best suited for your individual clients. And that might be different from client to client. if you're one of these guilty parties that's way behind in your logbook. I'll tell on myself, it's happened to me before. A lot of us CFIs keep track of our daily activity in some alternate form and then convert that into a logbook, whether paper or electronic. Fantastic time to make sure that is all up to date and neat and tidy. If you're considering moving between platforms, number one, there still really isn't necessarily an industry accepted best form. If you're one of these CFIs in particular that is concerned about the format because you might be moving on to an airline job or another professional flying job outside of education, there's not one particular preferred method, but it certainly would be an okay time to look at if you're considering transitioning paper to electronic. Not a whole lot of transitions I hear about going the other way. This would be a good time to look at some of those electronic platforms or consider building your own platform. There's not a requirement that you use a commercial provider from an electronic logbook standpoint. You just have to make sure that you're meeting the regular requirements of keeping everything documented, especially any of that time that's being used to meet a regulatory requirement. Now, if you are on that track or transition, whether you're going to transition to a corporate aviation job, military, charter, airline, whatever the case may be, a neat, tidy logbook is very important. This demonstrates the details matter. That demonstrates that you are able to keep track of all these minute details, and you're thorough and you're thoughtful and you're methodical and you're organized, you're all these things. So your logbook should always have a nice, neat, uniform look to it. Now, don't panic. Everyone makes mistakes. That doesn't mean you have to have the exact same pen color throughout the logbook. But make sure you're handling any mistakes in the correct way, lining out, making notations, giving a good explanation of why you're making an update, making sure when you go page to page in your books that your math works out, your addition works out, your single and multi-engine time is adding up to your total flying experience. If you're converting or moving to electronic, one thing I will offer is that it does give you a lot of flexibility in how you organize and what categories you classify time in. And this could come into play very soon if you're looking at some point to, again, move on to something new, going into a pilot interview, having to fill out insurance forms for your first jet flying job. There's all kinds of different classifications of experience. Some interviewer might want to talk to you about instrument instruction, different from primary instruction, and complex time or high altitude time, making sure your simulator time or your ATD time is created separately, or there's some delineation in that respect. So the electronic form certainly gives you a lot of flexibility because you can just create really an infinite number of categories. You can do that to some degree in paper, but this is a great time to be thinking about that, to go back through your logs, maybe just do some reflection, some reminiscing. That's always fun too, of some of those fun, memorable flights that have taken place in the past. And while you're there, it's helpful to make notations, because that is something that's popular in airline interviews. They oftentimes want to see that you know your logbook well. You know when to reference or where specific milestones occurred. So if you haven't done that before, have some Post-it notes with you and make notations of when that first solo happened, and then that private pilot, when that multi came, when that CFI practical came, and get reacquainted, if you will, with your pilot training experience thus far. It'll serve you well, certainly in the future. Continue to develop professionally. This is kind of tip number 10 as we bring things to a close. But there are still opportunities to network. We mentioned all these great virtual learning platforms for continuing to provide instruction. They can also be used for connecting with people in the industry. Want to make a quick mention that job fairs haven't completely stopped. The FAPA organization, FAPA.aero, they are hosting, as a matter of fact, just next week, a virtual job fair, and have a number of airlines that are going to providing online kind of overviews in 15-minute increments, and there's even an option, I believe, to be chosen to do some one-on-one kind of video interviewing even. So that type of activity continues. If you haven't obtained some of these other credentials that a professional pilot is ultimately going to need to obtain, like your FCC radio telephone operator permit, or your passport, or if you've let your passport expire, great time, because it does take a little time to find the forms, complete the forms in detail, make sure you get them to the correct places. Great time to do that. Those are two items in particular that you are definitely going to need as a professional pilot. When was the last time you took a look at your resume to kind of give you a start? If it's been some time, in the handout section, we provided a template courtesy of our friends at Republic Airways. This is kind of what a modern aviation resume is going to be looking for, and particularly at the regional airlines, this is what they're going to be looking for. So, if you kind of take this in order, updating your logbook, getting your total times and tallies all done, and then updating your resume, great time to be doing that. While we're talking resume, reference list. Have you built out a professional reference list, or have you even considered it? Again, this is killing two birds with one stone here, because not only is this a good time to make those updates, but this also gives you the perfect segue into reconnecting with other people in aviation. If you're going to include someone on a reference list, major faux pas, make sure they are aware. Make sure you give them that courtesy of knowing, hey, I would like to use you as my reference. So it's possible at some time when I apply or when I'm interviewing, you could get a call. So great time to be building that out. And updating those references. Now, if you're anyone on that's kind of thinking a little bit negative, like, well, these events of COVID have really set my career plans back, there's no doubt we've kind of hit pause on everything, for at least 30 days, and this is likely to continue a little bit, but that does not mean there's still not going to be a demand. And you having all these pieces in place would certainly be a wise move. Many of the legacy air carriers right now are offering kind of early retirement packages to airline pilots, and some are taking advantage. So while this is a hiccup, no doubt this is a little bit of a hiccup right here, we could once again be back to this kind of professional pilot acute shortage in fairly short order. So, our advice now would be continue to press forward, continue to build out your professional resume there. And those are our 10 tips for CFIs to stay active and engaged. We appreciate all that participation. We're going to entertain a few questions here. And Charlie, I want to pose kind of our first question back to you. And I know you've been talking to a lot of clients who have been on hiatus, but some of our audience here are interested in kind of understanding or learning a little bit more about what questions should they expect from their clients that are coming back, or what should they be, when they reach out to clients, being proactive about coming back, what should they be prepared to talk about?
Well, Eric, I think it's always good. We always want to be honest with our customers and our clients. Now, I'm seeing that we have a lot of interest in folks. You referenced that maybe the airline hiring might not be what it was 6 months ago for the next 6 months or so, and that's probably true.
It looks like we may have lost the audio there from Charlie, so I will certainly jump in and say that I mean, to continue Charlie's point, yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, expect that customers are going to want to know a little bit about what the new normal could be, what is going to be expected from them, what are you going to do as the educator to keep things safe. And similar to how I might talk to someone about, proper aeronautical decision making and risk management, you control, you're in control of what you do. All these takeoffs are optional. So it's going to be as safe as you can possibly make it, and as safe as you choose to make it. And there will be some that will make their own determination, and this goes for both educators as well as clients that decide maybe they can't, maybe now is not the time, or they are going to delay resuming pilot training. And again, this is very regionalized. There's certainly been some debate on the line and in the background about how, you know how could you possibly maintain, or you cannot maintain, the 6 feet of social distance on the flight deck. I totally accept that argument and that premise. You're absolutely right, you cannot. And that's why, again, to point to the fact that I don't expect there to be a national consensus with respect to being able to get back to in-airplane pilot training. No doubt there has been some training across the country that has continued. There are certainly individuals who are flying in aircraft next to each other that have begun to, put their own procedures into place about how they mitigate. And, some of that is sanitation and cleaning and or wearing masks, but it has to be an individual decision. And it has to have the support of everyone involved, the organization, you as the educator, the customer too. So it's best to set the expectations, and it's best to get that honest feedback. So, I would suggest that now might be the time to begin having those conversations. Charlie, do I have you back with us?
I hope so. Am I working now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll let you continue your thought there.
Well, I guess the thought that I was talking about, I don't know where exactly I got cut off, is when you're talking to new customers, it's the same as before. I really don't like to jump in and say, well, if to fly professionally, to fly for an airline, you need 1,500 hours, your ATP. That just puts things in too big of a chunk. How long is that going to take? Well, it could take 2 or 3 or 4 years. Oh my goodness. So I think the best way to start is say, everybody's got to solo an airplane first. And we can get that done in just a few weeks, and for not a lot of money, and get them hooked, and be honest, but being honest with them that how to start back flying an airplane. And then I think you mentioned, when I got my audio back, I think you were talking about that the sanitation procedures, and that you're going to follow to make them feel safe and comfortable with you.
Thanks for that, Charlie. There's also some talk, and I'll jump in on this one too and see if Charlie has things to add. There's also talk about whether we're hearing of organizations that have implemented or will be implementing, some form of a screening check as people enter the facility. And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. We are hearing that widespread, really, throughout the industry, that many organizations are either taking steps in anticipation of getting back to some activity whereby they would screen individuals, whether that's taking a temperature or asking some series of questions, maybe some online surveying. These are all possibilities to help determine risk factors, and to help keep the broader community safe. Charlie, are you hearing similar things?
Yes, absolutely. And that temperature check is pretty non-invasive now. They have ways that you don't even have to stick it in your mouth. Wonder where it's been the last time. But folks are often, I don't want to say that they'll lie to you, but a lot of times folks will be less than truthful about how they're feeling if they're excited about doing something. Ask a kid that's about ready to go to a amusement park if they're feeling okay, and they're always feeling okay until you get to the amusement park, maybe. So, you know, your customers may be a little bit that same way. They want to fly. They don't want to say, well, you know, I've got this splitting headache, or I've been sneezing a lot lately. So I think a temperature check is one that'd be hard for them to fake.
Charlie, thanks for that. With that, we are about out of time for the afternoon, so want to thank everyone again for joining us. Few quick reminders. One's a repeat that we did record the entire presentation, so you're welcome to check back our YouTube channels, also sportys.com/webinars for the archive presentation. Also be sure and look at the upcoming schedule of presentation content. We always have interesting topics that are coming up. Also, as this is a very dynamic, evolving situation, we'd invite you to stay apprised with with industry events, guidance via our various kind of online periodicals and journals, sportystudentpilotnews.com, sportysipadpilotnews.com for anything EFB related. We certainly do our best to get the information, disseminate the information quickly. So with that, again, thanks for joining. Best wishes for everyone out there in terms of staying safe, in terms of getting back to the flight deck, and again, hopefully sunny skies and tailwinds ahead. For Charlie Masters and Sporty's Pilot Shop, again, my name's Eric Radtke, and thanks for joining.